Welcome to Crossroads. Look, first off, as you can see, I'm on the road. I'm actually in Arizona right now. I just attended the memorial for Charlie Kirk yesterday. And Charlie Kirk has become, in the truest sense of the word, a martyr. I've never seen anything like this before. The principles Charlie Kirk stood for, they're now growing into an even broader and even stronger movement. Now look, one of the more emotional moments of the event was Mrs. Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's wife. And she spoke about the man who killed her husband. Watch this.
My husband, Charlie, he wanted to save young men just like the one who took his life. That young man, on the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him. I forgive him because it was what Christ did and is what Charlie would do. The answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us.
Oh no, cut out. We have to restart it. Now, it was pretty incredible to see that. She cried multiple times on camera. It was, hard I can't imagine having to do that. But what was really interesting was that the message she actually sent is going to be what not only becomes the kind of values of Turning Point going forward. The message she sent is also going to be the values, I think, of the conservative movement on the side of Charlie Kirk. What I saw yesterday, and I mentioned before, Charlie Kirk really does seem to become a martyr. What I saw yesterday was unbelievable. 2 full stadiums of people. The stadium I was in was, of course, the one where the main event was. They had a big press area for us there. There were around 70,000 people in that venue alone. It was a full stadium. They noted, actually, that Charlie Kirk... When Charlie Kirk established Turning Point, to one of his friends, he actually had sent a picture of a full stadium. He said, "This is my dream. This is my dream." He wanted Turning Point USA to hold events where they just literally fill stadiums. And they noted that this event that was put together within 7 days, they did this whole thing within 7 days. Charlie Kirk realized his dream after he was killed. What they also found was interesting too was that, more people showed up than they could have even imagined. 70,000 people led into this one venue. After they reached the limit on it, they had to open up the second venue for them, and they had an entire second stadium totally filled. Even beyond the second stadium, totally filled. They then even had more people. I heard various estimates on the true number of people who were there yesterday. the filled stadiums alone would have been around 150,000 to 200,000. I've heard as many as 300,000 people showed up in Arizona for the event for Charlie Kirk. That's more people than showed up for the funeral of Martin Luther King Jr. That's more people that showed up for the funeral of Elvis Presley. This was the beginning of something big, something very, very big. Now back to Charlie Kirk's widow. She also noted the peaceful response that the people who care about Charlie Kirk took. They didn't riot, they didn't protest, they didn't go kill people or harm people or yell at people. They took an opposite path where they actually are moving closer to more of a religious response. And this is how she explained it. Watch this.
Most of all, God's mercy and God's love have been revealed to me these past 10 days. After Charlie's assassination, we didn't see violence. We didn't see rioting. We didn't see revolution. Instead, we saw what my husband always prayed he would see in this country. We saw revival.
Now, what she said with that is also what you've been seeing a lot of people on social media saying. They're comparing the two movements. They're saying, look, one side, when they don't like something, what do? They yell at people, they attack people, they burn buildings. They react with violence and hatred. And there were a lot of people who raised that. It's actually very easy to react with hatred when somebody else is acting with hatred against you. Even more so when they kill the person you care about. Charlie Kirk's wife said she forgave the killer. Now, not everybody was on that level. In fact, one of them is President Donald Trump himself, who said that he has a hard time expressing the same kind of empathy that Charlie Kirk represented. But he also spoke about Charlie Kirk stood for. And Trump talked about the movement that's now sweeping the country after Charlie Kirk's death. Watch this.
Perhaps it should be no surprise that Charlie, who spent his life speaking with the critics of these traditions, ultimately became convinced that we needed not just a political realignment, but also a spiritual reawakening. We did. And we have to bring back religion to America, because without borders, law and order, and religion, you really don't have a country anymore. We want religion brought back to America. We want to bring God back into our beautiful USA like never before. We want God back. Charlie would have been so pleased to hear his friends and colleagues today giving testimony and giving glory to God.
Now, I think Trump is actually right there. What I personally saw yesterday could be described as nothing else other than a spiritual reawakening happening in the country. Now, look, the big question is going to be, can it be maintained? Will people continue this movement? Is this like a two-day, reflection people are having, or is it something that's going to echo forward? That's the real question here. But what did happen yesterday was a religious response to something very negative. And it was a deep contrast. On one side, again, a horrible tragedy. On the other side, something very positive coming out from that in terms of how people are reacting. On these points also, the President Trump noted that he's not as peaceful as Charlie Kirk. Trump talked about this pretty directly, in fact. He said, Charlie says, forgive them, love them. Trump says, no. He just bluntly said that he hates his enemies. He very much dislikes the far-left radicalism in the United States. And, on that point, Trump also noted the problems that many people are attributing to the motivation of the assassin. People who believe that violence is justified as a tool to shut down opinions of the people they don't agree with. Charlie Kirk represented the idea that you can sit down at the same table, you give the microphone to the person who dislikes you the most, and you share your perspective, they share theirs, and you continue debating like that until you come to some kind of conclusion. Charlie Kirk represented the idea that you can talk to people you don't agree with. And it's interesting, too, that what Charlie Kirk represented also is standing up against the social control system sweeping this country, which Trump also addressed. Watch this.
No side in American politics has a monopoly on disturbed or misguided people. But there's one part of our political community which believes they have a monopoly on truth, goodness, and virtue, and concludes they have also a monopoly on power, thought, and speech. Well, that's not happening anymore. We've turned that corner very quickly. Tragically, atrocities of this kind, and the kind that we saw in Utah, of all places, are the eventual consequence of that kind of thinking. If speech is violence, then some are bound to conclude that violence is justified to stop speech.
Now, when Trump makes that point, he's not making it just to say, hey, there's a problem in the country. When Trump makes that point, he's saying that he is going to try to dismantle that system. That basically there is an unelected system in this country that tries to control everything, from your speech to your behavior to, even the way people are framed, who has a platform, who does not, who can make a living on the internet, who cannot, and who use the systems of really politicized labels like fascist and racist and everything else as tools to justify the use of violence. And I'll be talking about this more after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, another type of movement is now sweeping the United States. The attacks against conservatives, the politicized use of labels like fascist to describe conservatives and Trump supporters overall. And, especially the way the legacy media has been framing people for more than a decade, marking them for these types of attacks. All of this is now turning around. All of this is now flipping. People are getting fired for celebrating the killing of Charlie Kirk. Show hosts are getting canceled. Their shows taken off the air for false reporting. And various organizations, including non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are now facing investigations for helping foment protests, riots, and the instability in the United States. And look, along with this also, President Donald Trump has announced he is going to designate Antifa, the anti-fascist action, as a major terrorist organization. Now, the White House wrote in a statement, quote, "I am pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terrorist organization." President Donald J. Trump. Official announcement from the White House. And they also wrote in another statement on X, quote, "Antifa is a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster." Now, look, as a recap, Antifa is not just an idea. There's been a lot of that going around. It's just an idea. How do you stop an idea? It was actually started as a front operation of the Soviet Union's Comintern, the Communist International. And I actually did a really in-depth investigation into Antifa, how it started, what it is, in a report almost a decade ago, back in 2017. This is what I wrote. I said this: The organization Antifa can be traced to the United Front of the Soviet Union's Communist International, the Comintern, during the Third World Congress in Moscow in June and July of 1921. And I note this, according to the German booklet, 80 Years of Anti-Fascist Action by Bernd Langer, published by the Association for the Promotion of Anti-Fascist Culture, written by a guy who supports them, it seems. Now, notice this, that Langer is a former member of the Antifa, formerly one of Germany's largest Antifa organizations, which disbanded back in 2004. And I noted the idea of the United Front strategy was to bring together left-wing organizations, unite the front line, in order to incite communist revolution. Now, the Soviets, they believed that following Russia's revolution, 1917, this was just a few years after, 1917, they said communism would next spread to Germany because they believed that Germany had the second largest communist party, the KPD, that was the Communist Party of Germany, and they were also, the kind of most advanced, industrial country, and they believed it was going to spread there next. Now, it was at the Fourth World Congress of the Comintern, 1922, just a few years after the Bolshevik Revolution, that this whole plan on fomenting communism in Germany took place. Moscow formed the slogan, quote, "To the masses," for its United Front strategy, and it sought to join together the various communist and workers' parties of Germany under a single ideological banner that it controlled. And interestingly, they say this, quote, "The United Front thus did not mean an equal cooperation between different organizations, but the dominance of the workers' movement by the communists," Langer writes. Now, on that point, people say, well, what about fascism and Nazism? Let me explain. I wrote this. Benito Mussolini, a Marxist and socialist, in fact, one of the most popular socialists in all of Europe at the time. He had just been recently expelled from Italy's Socialist Party in 1914 because he supported, World War II, and he later founded what? He founded the fascist movement as his own political party. Mussolini took power through his March on Rome in October of 1922, this exact same time. In Germany, Adolf Hitler, he became the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, right? The Nazi Party. That was in 1921. And he also mounted a coup attempt in 1923, also this exact same time around the Comintern. Now the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany, decided to use the banner of anti-fascism to form a movement. Langer notes, though, the KPD, the ideas of fascism and anti-fascism were undifferentiated. And he noted the term fascism actually served just as a rhetoric to serve and support their aggressive opposition. It notes as well that both communist and fascist systems were based on collectivism, state-planned economies. They weren't actually that much different. Both systems also proposed ideas where individualism was heavily controlled by a powerful state. You were not able to have individualism. And also, that idea is what led to the wide-scale atrocities and genocides under all of these systems. Notes as well that Germany's Domestic Intelligence Service, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the BFV, notes this exact same point. Quote, "From the viewpoint of the left-wing extremists, a label of fascism was pushed by Antifa, and it is often says does not refer to actual fascism, but is merely a label assigned to capitalism. While leftist extremists claim to be fighting fascism while launching their attacks on other groups, the report states the term fascism has a double meaning under the extreme left ideology, indicating, quote, the fight against the capitalist system. They're not fighting fascism, they're fighting capitalism." Now look, on this point too, for the communists in Germany, according to Langer, anti-fascism merely meant anti-capitalism. And he also notes this, that the labels, they served as nothing more than a banner under their own political vocabulary. Now, a description of Antifa on the BFV website, Germany's intelligence agency, notes the organization still holds the same basic definition of capitalism being fascism. And they say this, quote, they argue that the capitalist state produces fascism, or at least it tolerates it. Therefore, anti-fascism is directed not only against actual or supposed right-wing extremists, but also always against the state and its representatives, in particular members of the security authorities like police or, ICE at this point or anything. It also notes that, according to Langer, historically, by labeling the anti-capitalist interests of the communist movement as anti-fascism, so if you're just anti-communist, they call you, again, a target of this. He notes this, quote, according to this, the other parties opposed to the KPD were fascist, especially the SPD, the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Basically, the Social Democrats were labeled as fascists. And also he notes that, under this whole thing where the communists labeled everything as fascism, and so anti-fascism was the violent solution against everything that was not communism, this was the tool they used under that fake label. Now, also on October 23rd, 1923, the Politburo of the Communist Party of Russia, they held a secret meeting. And according to Langer, quote, all the important officials spoke out for an armed insurrection in Germany, a violent revolution, just like what they did in the Bolshevik Revolution a few years earlier, 1917. And under the banner of this, the United Front Action branded its armed anti-fascist wing under the name, quote, anti-fascisti action, anti-fascist action. That is Antifa. That is what it was. And from the anti-fascisti action came out all the Antifa branches in all the other countries of the world. It was the armed wing of the Communist Party of Germany with the intent of inciting a violent revolution. That is where it comes from. Now, Langer notes from the beginning the KPD was a member of the Comintern, and within a few years it became a Stalinist party, both ideologically and logistically. He also states it even became financially dependent on Moscow headquarters. Leaders of the KPD, with Antifa as their on-the-ground movement for violence and intimidation of all rival political parties, they fell under the command of the Soviet apparatus. Many leaders of the KPD later became leaders of the Communist German Democratic Republic, including the infamous Ministry of State Security, the Stasi. And so all these anti-fascist activists, they became the special agents of the communist state once they actually took power. They became the Stasi. Now, Antifa on this point has always basically fomented chaos, violence. They've always worked as a terrorist organization. Their focus was to use violence as a tool to foment political change. And if your ideology is to use violence as a tool for political change, by definition, that is terrorism. That's what terrorism is. Not only that, but what Antifa currently does and always had is a clear structure and a system of organization. It is an organization just like any communist group. And an organization also just like any terrorist group where guys are plotting in caves and so on, right? Now, not only that, but the groups under Antifa, because there's many of them, some of them are not directly under the direct Antifa designation. Many of them are technically affiliates, offshoots, and just function off the ideology. They use the booklets, they use the trainings, they use those things. A key question for Donald Trump is going to be, how does his administration target the group as a terrorist group when not all of them use the direct name? They use all kinds of names. And, they can just change their name saying, well, we're not really Antifa. We're something like a gun club, or we're like a group to arm the left or something like that. But we, use the Antifa ideology. The question is going to be, how do they go after that? So we'll see how they do it, the approach they have, when we actually see the official designation. Now, also, on the point of Antifa being accused of fomenting attacks on their political enemies, even news outlets and NGOs, they could face investigations. On this point, the Department of Homeland Security issued a release on September 17th, and DHS is calling on media and the far left to stop attacking Trump, his supporters, and law enforcement with DHS. This is the official release. They say this, quote, following the evil act of political violence witnessed in the country last week, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the resulting attempts to resist resulted in severe injuries to ICE and law enforcement officers, one being dragged by a car, another hit by a car. DHS is calling on the media, leftist groups, and sanctuary politicians to end their demonization of DHS law enforcement. They say this hateful rhetoric is inspiring political violence in our country and assaults against our brave DHS law enforcement. They say this, quote, following the evil act of political violence in the country this week and two brutal assaults on our brave ICE law enforcement last week, we are once again calling on the media and the far left to stop using these calls of violence against Trump, those who support him and our brave DHS law enforcement, said Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin. And they say that this demonization is inspiring violence across our country. Our ICE officers are facing a more than 1,000% increase of assaults against them. We have to turn down the temperature before someone else is killed. And they say, quote, the violence must end. And then they go on to show actual cases where this has led to violence. Actual cases of people being attacked, actual cases of this. And look, this call saying that you need to stop this is not ending there. It's likely the announcement from the Department of Homeland Security goes beyond just a request, hey, please stop. It's likely this is going to be turning into something leading to actual criminal investigations, looking into whether news outlets, NGOs, or the people giving the money, the wealthy financiers, are doing this intentionally, whether they are fomenting attacks, whether they're creating social uprisings, whether they are starting basically a color revolution in the United States. Stephen Miller actually addressed this, and he noted that one of Charlie Kirk's last wishes was that NGOs on the left would be held liable for fomenting violence in the United States. Here's what he had to say. Watch.
Yeah, so I believe what you're referring to is there are these nonprofit entities that organize, as the president mentioned, attacks on ICE officers, attacks on Border Patrol agents, organize doxing campaigns, which are a violation of federal law. They break off cement and they bring into riots. They have organized drop points for weapons, organized drop points for gas masks, organized drop points for all the materials necessary to launch a riot. Of course, you saw that during the Black Lives Matter riots as well, too. So there's this whole network of organizations. And I think the key point the president's been making is somebody is paying for all of this. This is not happening for free. And so under the president's direction, the attorney general is going to find out who is paying for it, and they will now be criminally liable for paying for violence.
On that point also, President Donald Trump was calling for investigations into George Soros and his son Alex Soros. They, of course, have the Open Societies Foundation. They donate a lot of money. They've been accused of being donors to Antifa. A lot of people note there actually is not direct financing. The way the money actually works, noted by Andy No, one of the main reporters who's covered Antifa over the years, it goes through a tier system. They donate money to various organizations. It goes to groups like the Tides Foundation. They then donate money to other groups. And after a few different, chains in the links in the chain, eventually it does go to the groups behind Antifa. It's actually not accurate to say they're funding Antifa, but it is accurate to say they fund it indirectly. So there is actually a chain where the money does lead to it. It's not all the organizations, but there are some. And there's also a lot of other groups in this country. There were the No Kings protests. There's the anti-ICE protests. A lot of those are not grassroots. You're looking at groups and organizations that have hundreds of funders sometimes. Oftentimes you're looking at groups that are communist-backed, sometimes even have foreign ties. In fact, one of the main individuals, a billionaire living in China, he is currently being investigated for this, although we'll see what comes out from it because he's ignoring calls to testify. But they are now looking into this. We'll also have to see whether the law enforcement agencies in the United States follow the recommendation of the president. Trump is calling on them to investigate this. We'll see whether or not they do it. Based on precedent, based on the way we have seen things work, they might. They probably will, I'd say. So we will see what comes out from this, whether crimes have been committed, whether groups are actually going to face charges, whether it's going to lead to nothing. We'll have to wait and see. But this is now currently starting. And with that said, let's jump into questions, comments, anything you want to talk about. So questions, comments, anything, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into it. Troy NM, you're saying, I said years ago that we'd see a return to the churches. It's going to accelerate now. You know, this is an interesting point. So the term a lot of people are using, including myself, right, is that we're witnessing a new revival. And this is something we've actually seen in the United States several times. You know, in the leading up to the American Revolution, actually even afterwards, the 1800s, there were revivals in the United States. They called it the Great Awakening and so on. So going back to the 1700s, you actually had two divergent movements in the world. In Europe, you had the Enlightenment, right? The Great Awakening, they also called it. And the Enlightenment in Europe was not like a Buddhist enlightenment where you're achieving enlightenment. It was people believing that religion and tradition was no longer necessary, that human progress, industrialization, scientific progress was making the religious world unnecessary. And people believed that human reason could basically replace all of that. The Enlightenment in Europe did lead to, kind of a scientific revolution, and of course with that, the march of human progress. That was the narrative. What came out from that was the French Revolution. What came out from that was the rise of socialism. What came out from that was genocides meant to destroy religious believers, destroy tradition, destroy the relics of the old world, to wipe out old ideas and old beliefs and so on. And what they created was tyrannical, genocidal maniacs. What they created was some of the most murderous regimes the world has ever witnessed. Communism, which has killed anywhere from 100 million to 150 million people. Horrifying movements that brought about suffering, the likes of which the world has never witnessed. Terrifying movements that created mass systems of surveillance, the likes of which people never could have even imagined. Brutality and tyranny that really are just horrible hellscapes to live under. That's what that brought us. In the United States, we had a different movement. Actually, the Founding Fathers, in the earlier days of their beliefs, were part of the Enlightenment. They were they were men of the Enlightenment, right? And a lot of the ideas they had actually pulled from it as well. Individuals like Adam Smith were talking about individual liberty, the rights of the individual, that, hey, maybe we don't need kings anymore. We can break away from this. We can govern ourselves. And the Founding Fathers were on that track, but then you had the Great Awakening. Pastors in the United States revived the religious society. There was a turning back to God. The people of the United States went back to religion. They actually veered off from the path of the European Enlightenment and human reason, quote unquote, and went back to tradition. The return to tradition, the return to belief, defined the new movement in the United States. And the Founding Fathers, when they established the system the United States represented, pulled from the Enlightenment, pulled from Adam Smith, and pulled from these new ideas, and pulled from, even Frederick Bastiat later on. That was a little later. It pulled from these things. But they also pulled from the Bible. Notably, they pulled from the book of Judges. The book of Kings being, of course, the Old Testament book talking about what it is to be a good king. The book of Judges talking about what it is to live under a system of self-governance, where you don't have kings. You have a system of law, the judges, but you don't have kings. That's what they pulled from. And actually, the American Revolution was led by the Black Robe Regiment, the pastors, oftentimes. And leading up through the United States history, we actually had multiple waves of reawakenings like this. America has had several Great Awakenings, where people had religious revivals where they turned back to religion and tradition. Now, America, as I probably don't need to tell you all, is now in another crisis. We're at a state right now where people just plain old don't get along with each other. Right and left is at each other's throats. There are racial divides. There are cultural divides. One thing you'll see a lot of people saying is that we're living basically in two different countries. I'd say maybe even more than that. And you have it so that half the country cannot communicate with the other half of the country, or don't even want to. Violence, labels, attacks are making it hard to find middle ground, and it's becoming more and more difficult to harmonize the society. The reality is, you can only have a country to the extent to which you can get people to get along with each other. If you cannot unite people across political lines and partisan lines and religious lines and cultural lines, you end up with tribalism. People divide each other, and you oftentimes have a balkanization. That will be the destruction of the United States if we do not fix this. The other side is we have a revival. The other side is we have one side, doesn't need to be both sides, come out and say, hey, I'll tell you what, let's sit down at the table, I'll listen to you, you say what you want to say, then I'll say what I believe, and let's try to find some common ground. We don't even need to agree with each other, we just need to understand each other. And what is really powerful right now is people are saying, you know what? That's what Charlie Kirk was doing. That's what he stood for. And you know what? He was very religious. He was. I knew Charlie Kirk personally, right? Fantastic guy. The reason why I think you have so many people reacting like they did is because a lot of people who knew Charlie Kirk, even if you didn't even know him that well, he was like a brother to you. You could talk to him very openly. He was very, real, very personable. Everyone felt like you felt like you knew him on a very deep level, even if you only spoke to him a few times. He was that kind of guy. Charlie Kirk, what he represented was a movement to go out to these schools and universities to sit down, and he'd say, who hates me the most? Who disagrees with me the most? Sit down across this table. I will give you a microphone. You have the mic. Tell me what you think. And people would make fun of him. They'd insult him. They'd call him names. They'd challenge him. They'd get these gotcha moments. And he'd say, okay, and he'd let him speak. And he'd say, okay, are you done? Let me tell you what I think. Let me tell you my perspective. And when they were finally done talking, he'd say, okay, don't interrupt me. I let you speak. Let me speak now. And he'd say, here's what I believe. And through that peaceful dialogue, again, even if they didn't totally agree with each other at the end, they came to understand each other. And Charlie Kirk represented that idea of bringing this country back together. That is something so powerful. What I'm glad to see is that even after Charlie Kirk was killed, in that horrible video that we all probably saw, horrible, horrible video, even after that, what he represented did not die with him. That is what a martyr is. That's what makes a martyr. When the ideas and values you represent live beyond your death. And when people after it are inspired by it. That's what starts a new movement. What we witnessed yesterday was the beginning of a new movement. What we witnessed yesterday really was people saying, you know what? I want to be more like that. You had an incredible amount of people coming out and saying, you know what, maybe I'll re-engage with my belief. I know this is more of a Christian thing. You have a lot of people saying, I'm going back to church. I'm going to go back to church. A lot of people saying, you know what, I'm going to pray again. You know what, I'm going to open that Bible again, right? You have a lot of that happening right now. A lot of people are getting closer to their religion again. And a lot of people are also saying, I'm not going to react with violence. I'm not going to meet like with like. I'm not going to let their hatred cause me to lose my forgiveness and my love. And, even Charlie Kirk's widow crying on stage, she said that she forgives the man who killed her husband. That is something, have we ever seen? Have we ever seen this? Have we ever seen anything like this? In my memory, never. Never. Not that I can think of. I mean, not in our lifetimes at least. You've seen it in history, but not like this. The idea that when a group of people are victimized, when a group of people are 100% justified to meet like with like, where you are justified to fight back. You're justified to hate them with every, fiber of your being. You are justified in that. To say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let their hate infect me, and I'm not going to become like them. I'm going to meet that with kindness. I'm going to meet that with the values of my beliefs. I'm going to meet that with forgiveness, and I'm not going to let them make me become like them and abandon what I stand for. That is powerful. And that's what you saw yesterday. That is what we just witnessed yesterday. And I'd say that's more powerful too, because what it means is that what Charlie Kirk represented will in fact live on. And, look, nobody's perfect. I doubt he was perfect in every way, right? But what you have is an idealized version of what a person stood for, what they wanted to be, what they aspired towards. That is what you have, again, with a martyr. That is what really starts things like this. And, I do think in the United States, at least yesterday, there was the beginning of a revival. There really was. The big question is, does that continue? Right? That's the real question. Is it going to last more than a couple days? Are people going to start infighting? Are they going to start fighting with each other? Are they going to start yelling at each other? Are they going to start being unwilling to listen to each other? I've heard many people say this before, and I think it's true. The problem with the left in this country is they often go too far. They often go to extremes, and they kind of tear each other apart because they create divisions by going to extremes. The problem with the right in this country is infighting. They don't get along with each other. They're independent. They don't see eye to eye. And conservatives oftentimes tear themselves apart from the inside. That's what happens. You do have a lot of divergent ideas. You do have a lot of different beliefs. The question is whether they can hold it together enough and unite despite their differences. That's the real question. And of course, all of this also happens right before the midterm elections. So we'll see what the political impact is. I did speak with someone at Turning Point yesterday, quite a few people to be honest. Something very interesting. A lot of people are saying, what becomes of Turning Point USA after this? Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, she is now the CEO of Turning Point. Turning Point USA is not going away after Charlie Kirk's death. Neither is his show, actually. Hope you still watch mine too, but they're keeping it going. But also on that point, Turning Point USA, I think they had around 21 or 20,000 people attend last year. I was told they've already had over 20,000, I think 22,000 tickets sold for the upcoming one. Already the movement is bigger than it was last year in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. And they're probably going to keep selling tickets. I don't even know how they're going to fit everyone at this point. They might have to have a stadium. Maybe Charlie Kirk's last wish on that, his dream, will in fact be realized, that not just his memorial, but even the event is going to be something that requires something that big to hold everyone. This is huge. We'll see where it goes, but that's where things are at now. Seymour Butts, you're saying, I doubt that the Kirk haters will ever see that video, but it makes me wonder what people on the left who say Charlie Kirk spewed lies, hates, and racism would say if they saw his wife forgive the person who killed him. It's mixed. All right, here's what I think is going to happen. I think what you're going to see in this country is what we're currently seeing. The far left, the extreme left, the people who say good, the people who say, yeah, they're getting tattoos of Charlie Kirk getting shot. The extreme left that are celebrating, the radicals, ironically, a lot of them are in the media. The real irony is we're seeing the most radical people on the left are like in the media. They're like the ones on these far left activist groups. They're the ones burning things down. They're the ones you see. The average person is not like that. The average leftist is not that extreme. They're like more in the middle. The people you're hearing, the people you're seeing, ironically, are some of the most extreme ones. They're the ones celebrating it. They're the ones laughing about it. They're the ones cheering about it. But most people are not like that. What you're seeing actually is that while the far left is celebrating, while they're saying, good, we need more of this even, which is horrifying, and Trump's actually investigating them because of that, because some of them are making calls for violence. The majority of people are actually saying, you know what, and I've heard people say this. They're saying, you know what, I actually went and I watched some videos of what Charlie Kirk was saying. I watched videos of him debating. I watched videos of him actually having conversations. And he was not like he was portrayed. The media falsely represented him. The media falsely portrayed him. The NGOs, the activist groups lied to you about what he was actually saying and what he represented. And lied to you to the extent that someone became so radicalized by those lies that they felt the need to murder him. And not even just Charlie, but a lot of people have been labeled like that. They've labeled me like that. You know what I mean? I don't think I'm that extreme, right? In fact, there was a blind test recently. There's a group called it's called All Sides. They're like a media analysis group. They actually did a blind test of the Epoch Times and a few other media like Reuters and so on. You know, where they remove the name of the media you're reading and they just show you the articles. Epoch Times, what I'm with, we were rated as the most moderate media of every single media analyzed. We were like smack dab in the middle and very slightly to the right. We are the most moderate, least biased media in the country, according to All Sides. I'm serious. And look it up yourself. It's called All Sides. And based on that, you know, to label us as far right, which they do, is a false label. We've been hit with the exact same strategies they used against Charlie Kirk. It's sickening. By the way, that's actually one of the reasons, too, I'm in Arizona. Aside from Charlie Kirk's memorial, I'm working on a new investigation into how these labels were formed, into how they did that. So I'm here doing a bit more work. So briefly on that, too, I won't have a show tomorrow because conflicting schedules. We can't make it work, unfortunately. So I will not have a show tomorrow, but I will be back on Wednesday. And I'm not ending the program, it's to stay around. Also Wednesday, I'm going to be speaking at an event in San Diego, and on Thursday at an event in Orange County. These are Epoch Times events. If you want to come, it's EPOCH SD, like San Diego.com. So if you want to come to the event, please come join us. It'll be great. I'll do a brief presentation, then we'll do a live Q&A in person. So if you're in San Diego or Orange County, Wednesday or Thursday, come join us. EPOCHSD.com. Another question, your Crash Bandit, you're saying, Charlie also said when people stop talking, it ends in violence. And I think he's right. Because when you disengage from people, this is my take. When you disengage with people, it's easy to start developing notions about people. And you know what happens with people, and I'm guilty of this too, and I think everybody is. When you don't know people who are representative of a group, you start viewing them, you define them based on their extremes, right? Because the extremes are what you see the most of. Let's put it this way. You have a classroom of kids, 30, let's say 30 kids, it's a modern classroom, and there's one kid who screams and has no discipline and, you know, is offensive, and maybe he has a couple friends and they laugh. If you go to that class and let's say you're a substitute teacher speaking to that class, and, you know, you're dealing with that, what is going to be your memory of that class? Is your memory going to be the 29 kids or 27 kids who were well behaved and listened to you the entire time? Or is your memory going to be the kid who insulted you and lied and joked and his little buddies jeering him on and everything like that? What are you going to remember? You're going to remember the uncomfortable situation. You're going to remember that kid, right? If you go on a trip to the supermarket and you're buying your groceries and some, You bump into somebody and they yell at you and push you away and say, hey, watch yourself or something like that and insult you. What is going to be your memory of going to the grocery store? Is it going to be, oh, I had such a great time? Or is it going to be that one negative experience? It's probably going to be the negative experience, right? We oftentimes remember the uncomfortable situations the most. We oftentimes will allow those things to weigh on us. And it's the same thing with human relations. We oftentimes will define a group based on the most negative encounter, unfortunately. And this is where you get things like stereotypes. This is where you get generalizations. This is where you get the idea that, oh, they're all like that, right? I'm not going to that place. Last time I went there, someone attacked me. They're all like that. I'm not going to go teach there. Last time I was there, the kids were rowdy and it was offensive. They're all like that. You oftentimes, me too, it's very easy to define a group of people by their extremes. And I will say too, for a movement, it's always important to reel in the extremes, because if you don't, you'll be defined by them. The extremes will define you if you don't reel them in, because they're what's most visible. They're what people see the most, they're what people hear the most, and they're the ones who will define everybody else if you don't either expose them or maybe distance from them or reel them in. Hey buddy, you gotta chill out. Hey buddy, let's go take a walk. Let's go sit down and get a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? You gotta calm down the extremes, or they're the ones who will define an entire group of people. And also I'd say this is why, if you know like really racist people, they'll sometimes have like friends of the race they hate. And they're like, yeah, they're all like that, but not you. I like you. You're okay, but not all them, right? And the reason is, of course, is because what they dislike is not everybody. They dislike the bad examples. They dislike the extremes. So I think what Charlie did in terms of trying to bridge these gaps was saying, okay, let's sit down, let's talk, and we will find we're not all like we've been portrayed. We're not all like the media has claimed we are. We're not all like what the NGOs and political rhetoric says we are. We are human beings with families and friends and emotions and love and kindness, who have birthdays, and our moms love us. I'm sure your mom loves you, even if she doesn't express it sometimes. And that's what we are. We have friends and families, and we're all, we all have good sides and we all have bad sides. We all have good days, we all have bad days. Some of us have had more painful lives than others, and some have dealt with it better than others. You know what I mean? And that's what we are. And when we can start realizing the humanity and recognizing the goodness, and sometimes, oftentimes there is goodwill, sometimes there's not, but usually there is. That is what actually helps us find empathy and common ground with each other. And you start realizing we're not actually all that different. I think recognizing that is what does change people. I know I'm talking a long time on this, but I'll give one more point. If you go back and read about the Founding Fathers and, the Pilgrims, especially, even before the Founding Fathers, when they were coming to the New World and they were dealing with like Indian raids and genocides, and they were all kind of doing it to each other, right? But when they got raided by the Indians, they'd scalp people and gut people and stuff hot coals in people's chest cavities and torture people to death and horrible stuff, right? They actually, the Pilgrims at least, they were not the violent types. And they actually were able to settle the United States because they were not using violence as the means to do so. The Spanish conquistadors, they did use a lot more violence. The French used a lot more violence. The British actually did too. And of course, if you go to like 1619 and all that stuff, those were British colonies. It's why we define Plymouth Rock and the Pilgrims as the founders and not the British who came earlier. It's because the Pilgrims actually found the working model. And the working model was, hey, we can't defend ourselves. If you guys want to come and kill us all, we're going to die because we can't defend ourselves. And so instead they had to use peace. They had to have Thanksgiving, right? They had to find common ground, and also they used religion as their tool to do so. This is what I believe. And they began converting, people on the other side. They began actually finding common ground. And they actually did, they were able, more so than any other group, from Europe at least, to settle the United States because they used peace and their faith to do so. And the basis of it was interesting. Actually a lot of it was because they wanted to spread religion to the New World. Part of it was also seeking religious freedom, right? A large part of it too was they wanted to actually spread their religion, in the Americas. And their analysis was, everybody is a child of God. We're all children of the same God. That was the belief. They all believed that we were all created by the same God. And when you understand that, we're not a whole lot different from each other. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And so back to Crash Bandit's point, Charlie said when people stop talking, it ends in violence. That's true. So if you want to stop it, you got to start talking to each other again. And look, Charlie took a bullet. Charlie was willing to take a bullet in order to have that conversation. Will you be willing to take a few insults to have that conversation? That's something to ask ourselves, right? Ashley from California is saying, how many authoritarian regimes can come to fruition because one side of the country would not stop with violent acts, so the opposing side responded with authoritarianism? That's often the ironic part of violence. There are some people who believe that violence, we just got to wipe them out, then we can live happily. They think that's going to be a solution. Usually it is not. Historically it has not. Usually what it results in is blood feuds and tribal conflict. Normally what happens when you meet violence with violence is you have 500-year wars or ancient conflicts where society and civilization can never advance or move forward because you're always fighting each other. There are a lot of countries on earth that have conflicts and tribal conflicts that have been going on for hundreds of years. And if you look at those societies, they have not been able to advance as a people. They've not, like country, right? They've not been able to advance because they're always fighting each other. All their resources have to go into it. You see it with even families. They had family feuds. Those really existed a lot. You see it with tribal groups in the world, where countries are divided into rival tribalist groups that always fight each other. And what happens? They can never advance as a people. They can never advance as a civilization because they can't get along with each other. The only way you break that cycle is with forgiveness. The only way civilization can advance, the only way civilization can become civilized is through forgiveness and also through rule of law. You can't go to Mexico and deal with the cartels and say, "Hey, buddy, hey, cartel leader, I forgive you." They're going to say, "Thanks. Now, give me all your money." You need to have that in rule of law, right? A combination of the two in reality to have a functioning society. And I think that's what's happening in the United States. I think Trump is actually saying, hey, forgive each other all you want. I'm still going after the extremes. That's what Trump is actually saying right now. Good, forgive each other. I love Charlie. He represented that. I hope you can all get along. In the meantime, I'm going to be arresting and deporting a lot of you. That's where he's going with it. But as a people, because the people are the bedrock of a civilization, the family unit, they would say in the past, is kind of the grains of the society, the foundation of everything. We are the ones who are going to decide whether we have a country. We are the ones who are going to decide whether the people of the United States get along with each other. We are the ones who are going to decide whether we are gradually marching one day to some kind of grand conflict that's going to tear our country to shreds, or whether we can reverse that and save our country. It's not some outside force that's going to decide that. That is on me, that is on you, that's on your friends. It is on us who are going to decide, will we have a country that lasts? Will we have a country that is able to find common ground and come back together, or are we going to instead fade into obscurity because of tribal conflicts? We're the ones who are going to decide whether or not that happens through our own choices and our own behavior. And so, hey, spirit of Charlie, maybe start sitting down and talking to people you don't agree with, or who don't agree with you. Maybe take a note from Charlie Kirk's wife. Forgive the people who've wronged you, because forgiveness is the only thing that breaks the cycle of vengeance. Forgiveness is the only thing that breaks the cycle of, hey, I want repayment from you. I'm going after you. I'm going to get what you owe me, right? Forgiveness, only forgiveness can break that cycle. And I do believe that religion has taught that as well, which often does bring about, one of the few things that can bring lasting peace to a civilization. All right, everyone. It's getting a bit late, and I have to do some more reporting today. I'm still in Arizona, going to be doing some, hopefully some interviews today. I'm working again on a broader feature on Charlie Kirk. Again, I mentioned I was going to be doing this. We will not have an episode tomorrow. I know, I'm sorry, I just took a whole week off. I was planning to. Sometimes we're on the road, scheduling just doesn't work out. And I hate canceling an episode for no reason like that, but we have no choice because scheduling doesn't work out tomorrow. So I'll see you again on Wednesday. Wednesday and Thursday shows as normal. Also, again, if you want to come to San Diego or Orange County, we're doing 2 Epoch Times events. So if you want to come meet, if you want to have a conversation, come out to San Diego, Orange County, EPOCHSD, it's like sandiego.com to register for those. We're going to do, I'll be doing a presentation, and then we'll be doing a live Q&A in person. So yeah, come out. That said, thank you so much. Join me again on Wednesday for the show, or maybe I'll see you in person. I said, as always, thank you all for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.